All right. We are warmed up and ready
All
to
right.
go. Hello. Hello, everybody out
Hello.
there. Hello to Danny. I want to welcome everyone listening to the very first episode 1 of the Yoga is Medicine podcast. I'm so excited that you could join us. I'm excited to be here. This podcast is growing up out of my 22 years of practicing and teaching the original hot yoga, also known as Bikram Yoga, and having witnessed so many thousands of people try the class, many of whom stick with it for a really long time. And then over the years, realizing that although this yoga in its pretty consistent form has been around for over 50 years in the US and really, really popular for many decades, to me, from my perspective, it still seems kind of minimally understood. There's not a ton of information. There is some good information, but I feel like there could be so much more. And it is the primary form of preventive and curative healthcare for lots of people all around the world. So this podcast has lots of missions, but the first one and the one we're going to focus on today is just to start adding to our collective knowledge the personal experience of some of the practitioners who have been through some sort of healing experience or improvement in their health through their Bikram yoga practice. So that's where we're going to go today. I wanted to introduce Danny as our very first guest. Thank you so much for being here, Danny.
Yeah, thanks. It's an honor to be your first victim.
I didn't want to say that. Anyway, thanks so much for being here and for helping this happen. Danny's been practicing for many years, and we'll hear about that. But I want to give everyone just some context on who all these people are. You might wonder, well, who does this yoga? What is it? So, Danny, I would love to just start asking you a little bit about your life before you found yoga, and since today we're focusing on health and healing, however you define it. I'd like to ask you about sort of your early memories of it could be physical activity, any sports you did, really anything you did physically, any injuries, any memories you have of sort of early life, but even up until teenage and young adulthood.
So I was never particularly athletic as a child. No major injuries. Broke my collarbone at one point. But I didn't really start doing sports until I was in high school. I started doing cross country. Oh. And which is a nice sport because it's more inclusive. Like anybody that can finish the course can be in the JV team.
Sure. That's so nice.
But one thing I noticed there, was a lack of flexibility. And interesting, my brother was on the team too. He was a foot taller than me, but we,
wow.
at the time when I was a freshman, and we were both, we both couldn't touch our toes. Like comically, sitting down, stretching our hamstrings, we could barely touch our knees. Okay. The two of us, and the rest of the team could bend over and touch their toes. So there's maybe something there, but it wasn't until I had some pain when I was running. I went from basically not doing sports to running, several miles a day, and I went and got orthotics, and that helped a little bit. But I didn't get pain until I was in college. At that point, I think I maybe stopped running because I used to run just for exercise. I think I stopped because of the pain. Okay. But when I first noticed it was, I don't know, maybe I was 20 years old. And I changed my major to music, and I was sitting down at a piano 6 hours a day and had difficulty playing, sitting down and continuing to play without getting back pain. So that's when I kind of started really looking for ways to looking for things to help.
Oh, sure. I appreciate you bringing up the piano training. Can I ask you, when you were the pain from running, did that seem to be sort of all over? You mentioned feeling stiff, but would you say the running was causing some back pain or just
time,
kind of general?
It would move around, and maybe because I was stretching, and I was trying to deal with it. I don't know exactly. I wish I remember. I never really took notes or anything like that. But I remember at first it was lower back pain when I was sitting down. At some point it would sometimes turn into upper back pain. And sometimes if I was running, I would turn into knee pain. But I think when I stopped running, occasionally at one point, I got to the point where I couldn't even walk without pain. It was years later in graduate school, and because of hamstring.
So it seemed to move, though. It sounds like that it wasn't just one spot of pain. It was
and that might be because I was aware of it and trying different things to, stretching, whatever I could do.
Sure. Yeah.
It wasn't until much later that I found strength training. Right. I was mostly focused on stretching.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then you said you're about 20, you changed your major to music, and you're trying to practice and play 6 hours a day, but it wasn't going so well for your back. So were you at that point, it sounds like you were trying things, you were trying stretching. Were there any other sort of interventions, physical therapy, or anything like that?
I discovered yoga at that point, but it wasn't hot yoga. It was like Iyengar, I guess you would call it.
Sure.
Like being in a cold room and holding postures for a really long time.
Okay.
And sometimes very cold rooms.
Okay.
And I would get something out of it. I know that's not an intrinsic part of the yoga. It just happened in my experience to be stuck in very cold rooms.
I have heard that from other people. That's not totally off of the main, but okay. So you found yoga. Were you looking? Did you find that yoga or look for it to try to help with some of the pain from
I think
the piano?
My main motivation for doing yoga.
Okay. And where were you at the time? You said grad school. No, this is college.
We're still in undergraduate. I was still in college then. Yeah.
Okay. So you started looking and you found a class. Is that something you would do once a week or more frequently or with the same teacher?
Whenever it was available.
Can you describe that?
Yoga wasn't big then. There wasn't like corporate yoga in every little college town.
Yeah.
So like the gym had.
So what year would
have
this been?
Oh, 2005 or 6 or something.
Okay. So okay.
Yeah.
So you would just kind of find occasionally. And do you recall, like if the class was consistent, or did it seem a little different each time? I know this is going way back in your memory.
I'm kind of combining the experiences of a few different courses I took.
Sure.
But the Iyengar had the guy that was really into the Iyengar. I think there was a consistent beginning of the class, and then we would do sometimes different things.
Okay. So you've done that for a bit.
But it was
all right.
Structure, right?
Yeah. Cool. And did you so you said you'd be sitting in a cold room holding things. Did you find some relief from any of the pain? Like, did you get some symptom relief?
But it was better than anything else, but it wasn't, it wasn't enough,
Okay. But something, you notice, okay, there's something decent going on here.
I think the first class, at some point there was a vinyasa class, and it wasn't like announced. It was just a different person taught the yoga class. Okay. And it was a totally different class.
Oh, and
that really helped me a lot more. I think because of you generate, it was still the same cold room, but you generate heat. And the sun salutations are good for stretching your back, I think.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So then you found a little more relief from that class you felt?
Yeah.
Cool.
And definitely I started feeling like a better, it's hard to describe, but just a sense of, you just feel really good afterwards.
Sure.
The yoga buzz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I can relate to that. Well, great. I like hearing about that early stuff. And can you tell me what were your first introductions to Bikram Yoga practice, any studios, etc.?
Yeah, so I moved to graduate school, and I went to it was in Minneapolis, and so it's a bigger city. There's a lot more options, and so I figured I'd try a few yoga studios. At that point, I really needed something, and actually, I had heard of Bikram because of you. We met. I don't know. This is before you had the studio. This is you were practicing. I forget.
I think it was probably 2005.
2005.
That we. I must have taught that class in the barn.
I knew there was this thing.
Yeah.
I knew, and it seemed extreme, but I was like ready to try something extreme. So I was like, "There's this thing," and when I saw it, I think I did Google Maps, just look for yoga studios in Minneapolis. I found the Bikram studio there. I don't know if I was searching for it, but I saw it and I knew, okay, well, maybe the heat. I knew the heat was something that helped me. So I had no idea though at that point that it was like a set of 26 postures. And I was used to the vinyasa, so it was I was surprised. I didn't know that aspect of it when I went for the first time. So this would have been around 2007, maybe 2008.
Okay. So then when you heard of it from me, either we were just talking about it or maybe we just did a couple postures or something.
Could have been gossip too about you.
Right. Who's this person?
So you remember.
Okay.
I remember some people maybe thought that didn't like that approach to yoga.
Oh, that is an opinion. Not everybody likes it.
It's an opinion that people have.
That's okay. All good. Yeah. Okay, so you sought out. You saw it. You're like, oh, that sounds kind of familiar. It sounds intense. Let me try it. So you went to the Minneapolis studio then, not really knowing too much about it. It sounds like.
No.
Do you remember your first class? Do you have any memories?
Sort of.
A lot of people do. Not everyone. Okay.
Yeah. I remember just being overwhelmed by the amount of sweat. Yeah. I think I didn't have like one of those things you put over your mat. Mm-hmm. I think I had a mat that I showed up with. And then I had this like towel that I rented to go over the mat, but that was kind of inadequate.
Okay.
And I just felt I was slipping and sliding all over the place. It was actually a little bit frustrating.
Sure.
And I was also just kind of like shocked at like what the things we're asked to do, you know?
Yeah, sure. Do you remember, I mean, you made it through the class somehow. You made it through. Do you have any recollections of how you felt? Was there anything significant at the beginning? You know, some people feel instant benefit, some people don't. And I'd love to hear about, like, if you remember.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Feeling any improvement? Okay. Mm-hmm.
But remember being relieved that it was over.
Yeah.
Oh, here's something I do remember. When at the end of the standing series, you have like a mini Shavasana. I thought the class was over.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it was like, I was awkward, but it wasn't so bad.
Sure.
You know, like but then it wasn't. I think that is the most difficult part though.
The standing series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when you're new, for me, also I had balance issues, which took a long time to, I'm still working on them now.
Right.
But so at the beginning, I didn't get much out of I didn't get as much out of the standing series as I did the floor series, because the floor series, I could basically do everything. I could get into each posture. I felt a little bit less somehow when you're lying down and you're going from a lying position to the sweat and the heat doesn't overwhelm you as much either.
Yeah, I think
when you're standing up. Yeah.
You don't have to stare at yourself in the mirror either. It can be a huge challenge for people.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you find out class wasn't over, but then you left and you went home, and something brought you back. I mean, you have not just done that one class. So I guess my next question for you is what was it? Some people go to the second class because they're like, well, I gave you my $10. I'm coming every day, right? There's all different reasons.
That's part of it too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think I was also committed to doing something. And one thing, I don't know if it was after my first class, but pretty early on, I noticed, because I had curvature in my back. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know your back has curvature, but I had like what do you call it? Like when it's like a kind of visible curvature that's not like a hump almost. Not like
in the upper back, there's lordosis and kyphosis, depending on the part of the spine when it's excessively curved, and then the scoliosis is that side curve. But
right. So what's the scoliosis?
Okay.
I have heard those words from chiropractors.
Yeah.
And I started going to chiropractors when I was in Minneapolis as well.
Oh, okay.
But I just noticed that it was I could just feel it, and it just felt like it was less.
Sure.
Like even after a few classes.
Wow.
Like I could
That's
feel
cool.
like even after the first class, I remember taking a shower and like reaching back and like, oh, geez.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
You
could feel it with your hand then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That's really
very
cool.
unscientific, right? But it's,
I mean, you, who else would have noticed that kind of thing, right? Like
right.
You knew in some ways that's like the best way to know. You knew what it usually felt like, and then there's a change in what it felt like. So I wouldn't dismiss it too hard. Yeah, no, that's really cool. So did you start? So you went back. You were committed to trying something. Did you kind of start a regular practice then, or were you? Some people are intermittent.
I did like a month.
Okay.
And then there's this corporate chain in Minneapolis that I think you know about. It also does like a hot yoga class. Yeah. As part of it, they don't call it Bikram. Yeah. But I was just I tried that, and that actually worked for me partially just because of how far I had to go to the studio. Like it was I had to go across town. I didn't have a car, so I biked there. It wasn't bad, but the studio was more convenient. There's one by work. And then I still enjoyed the vinyasa more. So I remember the vinyasa classes from my undergrad. Yes. And that just like, to me, it felt good. Like the whole experience felt like I found it challenging because there's like a kind of athleticism to it just to keep up. And I just felt like it was all the exercises I needed for someone. At that point, I was transitioning to like sitting at a desk all day from my new career, and I just felt like vinyasa had like the aerobic exercise, it had some strength training, it had the stretching, just like everything I needed to like make up for the fact that I was going to be sentient for the rest of the day. Like, sure. Like if you're like sitting in a chair, it seemed that's what I felt at the time, that it had everything. And I would do Bikram classes once in a while at the corporate place. So I think I only did 1 month at the Bikram studio. And I just felt like at that point I felt like I kind of wanted both styles. But one of the reasons I would do the hot yoga classes, even though I didn't enjoy them, was because I just felt like I made more progress in my back.
Oh, with the Bikram class, you were feeling like you made progress. You didn't like it so much, though. You preferred kind of the process of the vinyasa class. I remember
a time. So now we're a few years ahead. Like there was a time a few years into grad school when I noticed I would do a vinyasa class and it'd feel really good. I would get that, and I would just feel like it was just like the perfect exercise for me. And then the next day I'd wake up and I'd have pain again. But I would do a Bikram class and I'd feel. Maybe I feel overwhelmed. And part of that has to do with the balance, my balance issues, my issues with underdeveloped muscle, like I had strength issues as well. But I would feel my back pain would go away for days.
Wow! After one class,
after one class of the Bikram class, and then the other thing is I went to a chiropractor, and she was having trouble. Actually just adjusting my back because my muscles were so tight. She couldn't move my back. She couldn't crack it or anything like that. And then one day I went after doing a Bikram class and I had the flexibility and she was like raving. She's like, well, I don't know what you did, but that we have to get somewhere now. Nice. But then, and then I think my insurance stopped paying for the chiropractor, and I wasn't really getting that much. I felt better after the first class, but I wasn't really getting anything out of it. So I was like, I should just do the Bikram. It's, they had like cheap monthly rates at this studio, and there was multiple studios around town. It was convenient for me and everything like that. So that was the Bikram or the other
was
place? The corporate chain. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, and so, sorry, I just want to clarify. So you just kept going to the multiple location place because you could and it worked. Okay.
Yeah.
But you had still you had this experience of when I do a Bikram class, my back pain's gone for days and the chiropractor can do things. So that's kind of like in your information about, about the practice.
So that's
okay. Okay, that's cool. And so is that kind of the story of your yoga practice in Minneapolis, would you say? Is there anything else? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was, and then at some point I was doing kind of better and I started going less, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And then fast forward a little bit. I'm not sure exactly how many years, but you've practiced places other than Minneapolis since then.
Yeah.
Can you
So I moved to
kind
Europe.
of tell me?
And I was living in Zurich, which is one of the most expensive cities in Europe. I think it cost something like $50 or $60 to go to a drop-in class at I forget what it was. It was a lot of money.
Sure.
So I would go like once a year.
And this was at least 10 years ago, right? I mean, this is still a ways back.
It was expensive to go to a class. I would do it once in a while.
Okay.
I would do it, or if I was traveling, I would do it. Because it was at that point things were starting to come back. It's something that it just seemed like the back pain was something that was, and the flexibility issues was something I was constantly, is in the back of my mind.
That stuff. Okay. So
it wasn't like preventing me from doing my work, but it was like, it was coming back and it was something that I had to deal with,
Right. So would you kind of like, if those issues started to creep up a little bit, is that when you would kind of be motivated to go do a class and kind of get that relief? Or
basically, yeah.
Well, hey, that's great. Even once a month or something, if it helps, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Great. What did you find the studio like there? I know some studios internationally, some will do a combination of languages, like in Montreal, they'll do some French and some English. What was the experience like being in a different country doing basically the same practice? Okay.
Can't remember. I think in Zurich they did English and Swiss German, which is funny.
That's fun.
Yeah, Ausschnüffe and Inschnüffe. Those are the words I remember.
Is that for inhale and exhale?
Yeah.
Okay. Just guessing. I know zero German, but I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I only speak the standard German, so I never really learned the dialect, but I remember hearing it at the yoga studio.
How fun.
I think I practiced in Geneva, also in Spain, in
nice.
Norway once.
Cool.
Sometimes I think it was in Spanish when I was in Spain. I think Geneva was. I don't remember. There's a lot of English though.
Sure.
Abroad.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll bring up, which is not everyone might know this, but when you go to Bikram's teacher training, everyone, regardless of their native language or the language they're going to teach in, when they get home, they have to learn it in English.
Yeah.
And so everybody knows the dialogue in English. And then most places will have translations and teachers they work with if they're also going to teach it in their home language. Right. So it's not too surprising that you can find it a lot of places like that.
Yeah.
And it seems like, I mean, I've practiced another language too. It seems like even if they're speaking a language you don't know at all, you can follow along just fine because your body sort of knows it.
At that point, I just needed to, like little reminders so that I could get from looking around the room, which one we're on.
Yeah. That's cool. Did you ever interact with people very much there? Did you just sort of go in and do your thing and go home?
I never really had that many interactions with people. Yeah.
I'm just curious. Sometimes when you're visiting, you're just going to go in and just be there for that 1 second. Yeah. That's really neat. You could go to those places though. Okay. So you had some time in Europe at these studios kind of on occasion. And then were there any times where you, after that you practiced more regularly, or has it sort of been an occasional thing for you since then?
No, it wasn't until I moved to Lansing and I showed up at your studio that I started practicing. That's when it was the back pain had come back. Also, it was just like I had some life crisis issues. I was unemployed, so I had the time. I actually had this idea in the back of my head. I remember on my way to a yoga studio once in Minneapolis. I was like, one day I should just take a year and just practice every day. I think somehow I knew that if I did that, I don't know how I knew that, or I knew that if I did that, that'd be better. I just need to find a cheap place to live. And
Hey.
and just with a studio, which I eventually did. And I think I was there almost a year, maybe a little bit. I was
wondering, it seemed like almost.
It wasn't quite. But yeah, I was there for at the beginning once a day, and then after I had a job lined up and I wasn't searching for jobs all day, I was there twice a day. So
you were doing doubles?
I was doing doubles at one point. Yeah.
Wow.
Guess I felt like wow. I think I hadn't even heard of the idea of doing a double until someone at your studio. I don't know who was doing a double. I don't know who. You might have put the idea in my head, but at that point, I want my back pain was gone because I'd been doing every day,
right?
And I just wanted to feel as good as I could feel, basically.
Nice.
So
I'm wondering if that time there's a Kathy. One of the Kathys
in the studio had a flat I was just paying a monthly rate, so
you could just
might as well get my money's worth.
Come extra. Hey, we always say you can put yoga in the bank, like accumulate a bunch and it lasts for time, just like putting money in the bank and you withdraw the savings. Yeah. So I support that. If you got the time and if you've paid for it, just come. But I was thinking about who might've been doing doubles then. There's one of the Kathys. We've got a few Kathys, but one of them, she frequently would do doubles on the weekends.
Yeah.
And we've had people some people will drive 90 minutes to the studio. And if I had 2 morning classes, they'll drive 90 minutes, do 2 full 90-minute classes, and then drive home. That's been a thing that a couple people do. So it's like, well, I'm here, I might as well do another one. So I don't remember the intersection of who was there when you were there, but that's the thing. So what was it? Do you remember what it was like doing 2 a day? Like, was it too much? Did you feel like you could rest, or what was it like?
As you would think. Yeah. At that point, I had sort of gotten used to the heat and I was still having difficulty with the standing series, but the second was easier than the first because you already had some flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, it just seemed, it seemed actually kind of easy,
the second class of the day.
Yeah. The second one of the day.
Yeah. I do find that to be usually the case with people. At first it seems like, oh, that's impossible. That's crazy. But then the second class, you're like, oh, this is kind of chill and I can breathe better already. Wow. That's amazing. So you were feeling pretty challenged with your balance still, even after quite a bit.
Yeah. I remember talking to you about it because it wasn't until later that I figured out that I think one of the reasons that the Bikram worked for me is that you're not just stretching, but you're also strengthening.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have some muscle that's stretching, but then the muscle that poses it, you're also strengthening. And I eventually just started, once I realized that, I started looking into strength training and found ways to kind of speed that up.
Nice.
Like my glute muscles, the tibialis muscles, and the bottom of the front of like your shin, and abs, of course. And I forget the name of the muscles on the side. Like it's like a different type of gluteus.
There's gluteus medius that are kind of on the outside a little bit.
So I started strengthening those muscles.
Nice.
And this is when I moved here. I was I'm in Pennsylvania now, and so where I live, it's not easy to get to a class. When I do, I feel like I do better with the balance now. I can do a lot of the things that I couldn't do when I was in Lansing because I just have the strength to balance.
Yeah. So when you mentioned you started doing the strength training, is that more recent, or did you start doing that while you were doing the 2 a day? How did that kind of fit in?
No, that was afterwards. That's when I moved here and I got some weights and got a home gym. Not a serious home gym, but like some yoga mats and some dumbbells.
Sure.
Yeah, because I think at that point I had sort of conquered my back pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, which was originally what I got out of it. But I sort of like, as you know how like this is like generally in life, like as soon as you like when I'm working on my house, there's always something in my mind. Oh, this is the worst room in my house, right?
Okay.
Like right now it's my upstairs bathroom. Like the tile needs to go. As soon as I replace that tile, though, there's going to be some other part of my house that's going to be it's going to be the worst part of the house. That it's going to drive me crazy, you know.
Sure.
And it's like, as soon as my back pain was gone, I was like, oh man, my balance is really. I would like to have better balance.
Yeah.
You know? That wasn't my balance wasn't keeping me from working, right? And so it wasn't bothering me enough to go to hot yoga originally. But once I got rid of my back pain, then I was like, I'd probably, because then also you think about like, well, there's probably underlying reasons for my difficulty with balancing. And that's probably, that could cause other things.
Yeah.
Or I could just have I could have a better class when I go.
Sure.
Which I do now. Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. No, but that's interesting to compare it to a room in a house. I've heard from a lot of people, it's like they'll forget the original pain because it's been gone for so long. Yeah. And it's like, it's just out of your mind. Like as soon as the bathroom's taken care of, you probably don't think much about the bathroom, right? It's like, it's not glaring there. Yeah. That's really interesting how it moves. So now you're occasionally practicing. You said you can't get to a studio easily.
Yeah, it's like an hour,
once in a while,
hour and a half to get to the nearest class, and so I do it occasionally. Because it does, things come back a little bit. Like I'll notice I have some tension, or whatever. But I also, one of the reasons I would go to a class is because I didn't have the discipline to do the hot yoga here by myself.
I was just going to ask you, have you tried? I was just going to ask you, like, have you tried it on your own, and what was that like? Because a lot of people either are far from a studio or they don't have one anymore from the pandemic or things like that. So I'd love to hear.
I think I found a recording on YouTube. It wasn't yours. It was someone else's. This was a few years ago, and I was doing that occasionally. But I think I would just do part of it and incorporate that into my strength training.
Oh, nice.
One thing that's changed is now that I have more balance, it's changed my attitude towards the practice as well. Because when you have to just stand through the standing series because you can't do any of the poses because you don't have the balance, it's sort of. I just sort of always had a kind of a negative attitude towards it. Like, this is something I have to tolerate in order to get to the stuff that's actually going to help. Yeah. But now I can do everything. I feel like I have a better attitude.
Well, that's cool.
And I kind of like look forward to a lot of, like one thing I'll do now is I'll just do a breathing exercise in the initial, I forget when you bend to the side and
half one with hands to feet.
Just to warm up and stretch. And then I was like, I do a few more postures. I'll do a few more.
Nice.
I'll kind of fall into like doing most of the sequence, which is
that's cool.
Whereas before, I used to have to really struggle to get myself to do even just a little bit of it at home. Sure.
Oh, I can relate. It's interesting how it changes over time too, and like our attitudes towards it and things like that. Yeah. That does make me think of what we could categorize as, other types of benefits besides just like a physical pain. I know a lot of people seem to get tremendous stress relief from the practice. I'm wondering if you experience that, not just so simply, but at the different points where you have been practicing, because you've been in different physical locations, different frequency of practice, different life situations, right? How have you found the practice to sort of interact with what you experience as stress or stress relief, things like that?
I think about like when I first moved to Lansing and I was kind of going through a crisis, and I thought it really helped, Now I just deal with stress by just like eliminating it from my life,
How does one do that, Danny? How do you
just quit your job and you just, stop talking
Tell
to people.
Everybody listening,
that
hey, by the way, you can just take away
just
all
drop
the
out and just like, okay, I'm not going to let that into my life, I mean,
Sure.
you can't always do that, obviously.
Yeah, I know.
But I found myself in a place where I can just like leave a toxic career and so now I don't. Now I don't really feel anything like that when I go to when I go to hot yoga because I'm actually doing okay. It doesn't do as much for me. But in times of my life when I needed it, it definitely. I mean, the stress relief, just like the sense of. I mean, you get like a real. We were talking about the yoga buzz. You get like a real sort of like euphoria. That doesn't have a crash at the end of it.
Right. Somehow it just melds into the next thing, right?
Yeah, you just sort of like you just feel really good for a day or so.
Is that can you share about that? Like when you have that, you call it a yoga buzz, we call it all different fun things, but how can you describe that at all? I mean, you say it's euphoric and it kind of lasts for a day. Do you ever have does it vary, I guess? Like is it always consistent? Does it vary? Does it seem to last longer or shorter, or is it kind of just all the same?
Yeah, I think it's more intense if you haven't done a class in a while. I think the heat helps. I think. And maybe like my attitude going into the class. Like if I go in to the class and I'm distracted, I don't have as good of a class. I get something out of it, but I don't get as much out of it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and it sounds to me like you were saying when you were in the more stressful circumstances of your life, the contrast was greater, right? In terms of your stress level.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so great. Because I know so many people are in a situation where they can't take away the stressors, right? Like they're in them every day. They got to show up at a place where it's not necessarily helpful or healing or positive. So
right.
To me, it's amazing that there's a thing one can do to just somehow, I don't know. Sometimes I'm always thinking of ways to describe this. Like, what is it that happens? There's probably something physiological and mental about the stress relief, but I don't know.
I don't quite understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. But all I know is that I experience it, and other people do, I think, too, as well. But
for sure. Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
Like, like the stretching makes sense. It makes sense if you're stretching in your hot room that you would, that's intuitive to me that it would help, if you have pain.
With relieving stress or
relieving a muscle that's tight and you stretch in a hot room, that makes sense.
Makes sense. To me. Okay.
What I don't understand is how it affects your mental health so much.
Yeah. That's a fun question to ponder. Yeah. What is happening?
Like what exactly is going on,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun to speculate. I have all kinds of theories, but I mean, and part of that comes from me listening to so many people, right? Like we're hearing your story. Sometimes I ask people, sometimes I don't ask people, and they're like, oh my gosh, am I the only one feeling this amazing? I'm like, no, you're not. Right. They just are incoming to me all the time. So, anyway, that gathers in my mind to start speculating, like, what are we doing in common? And even though we're all different people, have different life circumstances, there's something pretty consistent, happening in all these people and how they like it. It makes me ask the question, like, well, what is stress exactly? Which I remember, gosh, I had a conversation with my PhD advisor. I didn't finish my dissertation, but my advisor is just so brilliant. I absolutely loved her. She would always kind of jokingly say, oh, and then we just have the small problem of fill in the blank, like history or time or capitalism or
meaning of life.
The meaning of life. Anyway, but one of those things she'd bring up is like, then we have this small problem of like, what even is stress?
Yeah.
Like, how do we even put our minds around that? But somehow we feel stressed or less stressed, or we just feel can feel amazing, even if we don't know why or what's all going on in there. So it's fun to ponder. Thanks for well, and also I appreciate. Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
I can think some little things make sense to me, like the fact that Bikram Studios are generally pretty careful about aesthetics, and things like the lights are low when you go in, and there's no talking in the studio.
It is pretty consistent,
you know, and there's not music blaring while you're doing, you know, classes, and you're just kind of focusing on this thing that you're doing together. You know, I think there's something kind of, you know, other like churches do that, you know.
Sure.
You know, and some, you know, even like I like to shop at Aldi instead of Walmart because, like, partially because they don't play music, and like they have like a nice, like the lighting is not nice, and there's not like flashing things, and it's like
interesting.
It's like a nice environment to be in. I think the Bikram studios generally have that, and then I think there's something about the heat too, because people, like a lot of people, do saunas and don't do yoga while they're in the sauna. True. You know,
right?
And they get they experience a lot of the same. They report the same thing about stress relief, and they're also, like, I think part of the sauna is being quiet and breathing, and
like all these elements. So like, okay, you have a consistent kind of structured place. You're just kind of there with less input, I guess you could say. The aesthetics of the place. That's interesting. That makes me think too of, let's say someone were listening to this and they had never been inside a Bikram studio or done the Bikram practice. What, like, could you share, or maybe you've done this with people, if you've ever invited anyone, like, what would your 1 minute or 30-second elevator speech about, like, what is this? What do we do when we go in there?
Oh yeah.
To someone
I just
that's
tell
never
people
done it.
It's yoga in a sauna.
Oh, great.
That's what I tell. Yeah. And people know that, though. I mean, there's like people joke around. People who've never done hot yoga joke around about it. How they'll never do it, and everything like that.
Sure.
So,
but like step by step, like you're saying, you go in. I mean, from your experience, you go into a place that's kind of aesthetically simple, and you go into a room, and the lights are dim. But if you were to describe, you know, very simply, so what happens when you're in the room? Like, let's say someone didn't even know what yoga was. They had, you know, because we have, I think a lot of people have assumptions about what it is, or let's just imagine, right? Some people think, well, it's just a stretching class, or it's like, well, I don't know. People have a lot of ideas. So if you were to describe it to someone that really didn't know at all what it was, what would you tell them that you're going to do?
Go with, it's yoga in a sauna.
Right, but they don't know what yoga. No, I'm like, now I'm
they don't know what yoga
challenge
is.
you. Yeah, like let's say they just had no idea what yoga was.
I would say
they
stretching.
know they have arms and legs.
I know it's more than stretching, but that's what, if I had said one sentence, I would say stretching.
It can be more than a sentence.
Stretching and breathing in the sauna.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Now, if you were to describe, let's say, you know, you've had this experience with Iyengar and Vinyasa classes. If you had to describe the difference in a few simple terms, like you've described that you feel a little different, or you did at the, you know, the difference in your back pain relief. But if you were trying to tell someone like, well, there's this option and there's this option, how do you experience as it different? Or is
well, I don't know enough about Iyengar to, you know,
that's okay.
to talk about
whatever
it.
You
but,
have.
I know there's postures. I know there's some sort of system.
Okay. That's fine.
Vinyasa, I feel like Vinyasa sort of gets at the same thing that Bikram gets at, in the sense that you're like, the room isn't necessarily heated, although there's some of that now too. But you're doing poses. There's more of a flow to it, and then that you actually generate internal heat because you're actually, you know, working to actually go through the poses rather than just holding a pose and then relaxing, holding a pose and relaxing. Yeah,
which is what we would do in the Bikram practice. Hold still, and then
so there's a little bit. I think people that are new to yoga often like the Vinyasa because it just feels a little bit more. I think it's easier. I mean, even though it's actually physically difficult, I feel like it feels more natural.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because you're moving more, or?
Yeah.
I don't really know. I'm just, I try to think about
where
people
more like exercise, baby.
So maybe, well, honestly, maybe it is just more familiar, right? If we're used to culturally, exercise being like, I'm going to be moving continuously, and it's weird to hold still. Like,
I think also it keeps your the movement keeps your mind off of, you're just focused on the movement and keeping up. And whereas in the Bikram, there's more time where you're just like in a pose and you can see the people around you. You can see yourself in the mirror. You can just like it's, I think, a little bit more terrifying to someone who's new.
Sure. No, that's totally valid.
Vinyasa, you're so worn out.
Yeah.
You know, that you're just not really thinking about that. And at some point you're like, okay, I got to take a break. And you get back into it. Right.
Sure.
So I think for beginners, that's actually, that's appealing. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to stare at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
I always wonder, that mirror thing can be intimidating to people,
right.
Or, I'm always really interested in where people are coming from with that, but it's definitely a thing, right? Like, we don't stare at ourselves in the mirror for 90 minutes most of the time.
Right.
And if we do, we have all the baggage of like what we think about what we see in the mirror. And anyway, that's a whole nother long topic.
Maybe,
but
yeah,
depends. And some people, honestly, I mean, I know a lot of people that it's too hard for them to look at themselves in the mirror, and they just don't. And I'm not going to push someone like, oh, you have to stare yourself in the eyes. Just figure out, like, keep your eyes sort of in the direction of the posture. Like when you're standing, don't look down, right? I had a teacher once tell me, look at I don't know if she said that, not quite the top of the mirror, but in the reflection, like above your head, right? So you don't always, especially when you're new, you don't have to just full on confront yourself if you're not ready to, because not everyone is, and it's fine. But you can still get the benefit of like, okay, I can maybe peripherally see things, or maybe I'm comfortable looking at my feet to make sure they're lined up. Or once in a while, you can look at your, alignment in there. I think, depending, some people walk right in and they're like, bring it on. Like, I want to see myself and know everything about myself. And other people are like, oh God. And, hopefully all those two extremes and everyone in between can come and try it. Right. Like that's my wish for the world. Right. It's like, I want you to be able to come in here and just do what you can, so you can get the level of benefit that you're ready for. I mean, I've seen such a range. Some people that like, I just need to be in a room and get my heart beating, and I'm just going to sit here. And I'm like, that's fine. And other people walk in and they have these like massive experiences in their first class, not just physical, right? They're just like, I had an experience, Anne, in my first class. I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. But, we're all at such totally unique places with all of it. So it's really cool to hear about yours.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would want to say to somebody who's at least interested enough? They're like, oh, this is kind of intriguing. What's Danny's advice? What should I do?
I hadn't thought about
Short
that.
and long.
I guess I would say, go ahead and try it. And then, for most people, when they start, they're not going to be able to do the whole thing. So I think just maybe for most people going in the attitude of, I'm just going to try it. Yeah. Try and do one of each posture maybe, or and see how it goes, and just be in the room. And
that's good. Yeah. That's good advice.
Just keep an open mind, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's, I know, maybe my experience is different. Mm-hmm. I think I wouldn't have been, I think the other types of yoga sort of opened me up towards Bikram yoga. I know you seem to see Bikram yoga as a beginner yoga. I couldn't do most of the stuff as a beginner. Sure. And I had to kind of work my way up to it, so but I do think it is like, I don't know, to me, I got the most benefit from it. Like other types of yoga are great, and they help me, but I feel like, and they maybe help me get into yoga enough to do the Bikram.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's helpful to think of like, even just having your mind open to being in a room with people doing something like that, right? Whether you think it's stretching or concentration or all the things, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting that in your experience, they were kind of a preparation for.
Right. And I guess, the other thing I would say is to not worry about the other people in the room. I've been to studios all over, Europe, North America, South America. And people are just really, everyone's struggling with different things,
Yeah.
But no one is there because they're just in amazing health and want to show off, Like everyone's like struggling with something and is probably self-conscious about it. And maybe also feels weird about being in a sauna half naked with a bunch of strangers, but just gotten over it, And so you should just get over it too, right?
Just get over it. Just go.
And just
That's so hard though.
I've never had, I've always had positive experiences with everybody and all the studios. So
yeah, no, that's such an interesting point though. I mean, what we bring in with us is what we think other people might be thinking, right? So I definitely am aware, and I do try now with new people to say, like, all these people are on your side. You might not have spoken a word to them. You might not know their names. You might think, what are they thinking? But they all had a first class, and everyone has struggled with things, and they're struggling with something now, or, will in the future.
Right.
And another way I sometimes share with people is like, each person in here is so working on their stuff, focusing on their breathing.
Exactly.
They might know you exist there as like, there's a human there, but that's about it. Like, there's another body over there. And that's probably the extent that they're even aware of you.
Yeah.
Right? So, you can, free yourself from worrying about what they're thinking about you. I know it's so hard though. We're so social, social creatures. Like, how am I going to fit into this? And what's everyone going to think? And we're just like lucky if sweat doesn't drip in our eye. We're like, oh, I didn't get sweat in my eye today.
Right.
Right. Like just this such basic, like, let me just hydrate, super simple, basic survival stuff. Yeah. That's cool. That's really helpful. Awesome. Thanks, Danny. Is there anything else on your mind? I guess, do you see yourself just kind of continuing it when you can? Kind of do?
Yeah.
I don't expect people to have a life plan for what they're going to do, but some people say, well, like, I have to have this in my life somehow, always. Other people are like, I don't know, I'll just see. But it seems like it kind of is your helper here and there, right? It's
something I do when I travel too,
Oh yeah. That's great.
Which is always kind of fun to go to another place, and you're
but you're like Insta friends, right? You're like instantaneously
sometimes,
in this. Not that you, I use that a bit loosely. Like, you may not know their names, you might not know anything about them, but like, you have an experience together that you've shared, right?
Right.
In a way.
Yeah.
Which I think is so cool.
Yeah. Sure.
It's like having a song in common. Like, oh, I don't know you, but I just sang a song with you. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Something you said real quick you said, oh, Ann, I know you see it as a beginning class. That made me think, no, I appreciate, I appreciate you saying that. But it is interesting, what makes something a beginning yoga class, and what are all the things going on in yoga classes today, right? Like, there are some that are a lot more movement based. I try to think qualitatively about like, why can I honestly say this is a beginning class, not as a joke, right? And not as, I'm not trying to trick anyone right into thinking it's beginners, but it's really for advanced. But, my perspective on it is I realize new people, they literally, myself included, cannot hear everything that the teacher is saying because our minds are doing all this and we're not able to concentrate, nor are we able to even though the instructions are simple, we might hear like, do this with your leg and put your body weight here, but our minds are so busy.
Well, some people also have, some people have easier time with written directions than spoken directions. I'm one of those people. And so I first just kind of relied on
Oh yeah, I
watching
remember you saying
people.
this. Yeah.
I know it sounds funny, but like I just
No.
there's just so much going on, and then the direction, and
Yeah.
but sometimes I'll miss postures just because I'm like
Yeah.
zoned. I'm
Overwhelmed.
like I don't realize like the teacher will say something, and then and like somehow just like I hear the words and it doesn't, I don't put it together or whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't sink in or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not too uncommon.
Yeah, I think now that I know the series pretty well, so that's not really as much of an issue for me. But sometimes with directions, I should get more directions. And you gave me a lot of directions actually, and sometimes it'd be difficult to, I don't know,
process
just
or
like your right hand, I know which one's my right hand. Just like in the moment, sometimes it can be difficult to,
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Do you find now that you've done it and you sort of like, a certain level of how the postures go and what to do? Do you find yourself in terms of the verbal, do you feel like you're hearing and absorbing a lot of the words of a teacher, or does it vary, or, are you still more in a visual? Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I'm a little less overwhelmed now.
Yeah.
By the whole thing. So I'm a little bit more present, or a little bit more, not present, but always present, but sometimes I'm just, consumed by other things.
Sure. Yeah. No, I always wonder, how much, like as a teacher, I'm talking for 90 minutes, right? And I realize that out of, let's say there's 20 people in a class, I know I can see when certain people, like they are hearing and processing and trying every instruction. And this kind of goes back to the beginner's nature, right? Like I really try to give, Simon says, super high detail what to do. But I also realize not everyone is able to absorb it all, or at the beginning they're not. And over time, I know for myself, I think I heard like 10% of the instruction when I started, as very much like what you're describing. Yeah. I'm like, okay, I hear things and I'm overwhelmed and I see things. And then I know the teacher's been sort of Charlie Brown teacher talking in the background, but I didn't hear anything. And then you're like, oh, they've been talking. But anyway, I recognize people are in all different stages of states, absorbing. But some of it you can see, obviously, if someone, people miss and skip postures, or they'll do a totally 5 postures ahead, right? Like this happens. And I'm just like, oh, well, obviously that person went somewhere outside of the instruction in their mind. They'll catch up. It's fine. We all have a good time. Right. Yeah. But I'm really, it's so interesting to me. Like, how is it possible to cultivate more listening concentration, or people just the way they are, in terms of being able to learn that way? I'm sure it varies, but it's an interesting question to me. It sounds like, and you mentioned you absorb, like I gave you some extra sort of detail instruction recently, and like you sounds like you're incorporating it, right? Like you're able to absorb more detail after all this time. So that's cool. Yeah. Fun. Well, thank you so much
thank you
for just talking through your story a little bit. And we're all like in the middle of a journey too, right? There's yoga in the future, and we have bodies that age to certain extents, and we have use patterns and injuries that happen. So
right.
To me, the story is always unfolding. It's not like here's Danny's story and it's over, right? It's like, it's where you're at right now. So I appreciate getting to have a little snapshot of it. Thank you.
Yeah. This is fun. I'm looking forward to seeing where this podcast goes.
Yeah, me too. Is there anything that your mind like wanted to pick my brain on, or are you good?
I don't know. I can't think of anything right now, but
okay,
for sure, right. Yeah.
Well, we can do it. We can do a sequel.
I'll go to the comments section.
Oh, great! Questions for the next episode. I have thought about that. Would be really fun to have like a Ask Ann. We did this at the retreat, actually. On the recent retreat, we had 20 people, and it was so cool because we had the same 20 people in class every day for 7 days, more than once a day. normally I have different variations of people in the class. So there's like different inputs with the same people. There's still different inputs, but it's not because the people are different. So anyway, at one point, I don't know if I thought of it or someone else thought of it, but people started leaving me notes on my teaching chair with questions like, hey, can you talk about such and such in the class? And I was like, oh, this is so great. I think Amy started it. Maybe it was her idea. I don't even remember. But I love it when people have a question on their mind, but you never think of it during class. And it's not often appropriate to just say, hey, can you talk about this? So I loved having these notes on my chair, like 3-4 questions. And then I see them there and I could bring them up as appropriate in the class. So anyway, maybe the comment section can be questions for the next one. Super fun. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been so great to talk to you. And thanks for everything, helping me get this going too.
All right. Well, good luck with it.
Awesome. Bye.